Well, hey everybody. I know you can't tell by just looking, but this is some brand new video equipment from Texas Christian University. Thank you all and go Frogs. Now, let's get right to it, shall we? What's on everybody's mind nowadays? Well, in a way, a lot of stuff. There's the moldy reflecting pool. There's that big win. That's the war against Iran. The Argentinian wrestling team. I don't know if you saw him a couple weeks ago or not. Erling Haaland's raccoon. Good for him. But inflation's on that list somewhere, isn't it? I mean, inflation, especially the price of gas, has been up and down like the Assyrian Empire. And I'm just talking about the rate of increase, not the overall level. That's just plain up. In fact, since the June of 2020, the cost of living has risen by 30%. Everything's almost 1/3 more expensive. So unless you got a 30% raise over that period, you're worse off. Somebody ought to do something about that, huh? Well, in our economy, that somebody is the central bank, the Federal Reserve. They are the ones charged with controlling inflation in our economy. This is even though they lack any policies that could actually fix it. It's like making dentists be the ones be in charge of auto repair. Oh, they ain't dumb. They just don't have the tools to get the job done. So, why are they in charge of controlling inflation? And why do they and the majority of economists all think it's a good idea that they're in charge? Well, bottom line is it's because inflation is very poorly understood. Let's have a quick look at the economic theory. I'm going to draw some graphs. All right. Probably most of y'all had some economics at some point. Oh, did you hear that panda screaming? I want to put price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. Now here's our demand curve. And notice that it is negatively sloped. What this implies is that as prices go up, consumers are not willing to buy as much of a quantity of what there was before. Now a supply curve says opposite. These are the firms. These are the producers. And it gets positively sloped because the more you're willing to pay, the more they're willing to produce. Let me show you that. As the price, if the price is way down here on the supply curve, they ain't going to supply much. Well, I guess I'll make a couple of them things, but overall the market for that sucks. But if the price is way up here, why then they'll produce all kinds of it. Other way around, when prices are real low, consumers are like, well, I'd like to have all kinds of that. And when prices are real high, they don't want much of it at all. All right, so that's where you get the slopes of the lines from. Now the intersection, that's going to be the place where the quantity that consumers want, let's find out what that is. At P sub 0, according to our demand curve, consumers want Q sub 0. Oh my gosh, that's exactly as much as the producers want to supply. At P sub 0, how much would they like to supply? They'd like to supply Q sub 0. Oh, what a glorious thing. Now, if the prices were higher than the intersection, then what we got is firms are willing to supply a higher quantity than consumers actually want to purchase. So what happens is they got an excess supply, they start marking things down. Picture your local grocery store the day after Easter, and they've got all this Easter egg dye left over. What do? They mark it down, right? They mark it down. So they start marking it down, and as they mark it down, so they get rid of that supply, and they stop making as much of it, and the consumers want to buy more of it, right? So when you start off above the intersection, the prices start to fall, which causes the quantity supplied to go down, causes the quantity demanded to go up. What about the other way around? Well, at prices lower than the equilibrium, now we got an excess demand. People want more than firms are actually producing. So what's going to happen is they're willing to pay more. They bid up the price, right? And now as they, that pen don't work. As they bid up the price, let me see if I can find a green one that works. Not yet. Third time is a charm. Works okay. All right. As the price goes up, so they're not as willing to buy as much. Can't really see that too well, can you? And as the price goes up, producers are willing to produce more, all right? So that's the basic way this diagram works. That's why it gets taught in every econ class in the world. Now, are there economists who believe this doesn't very well reflect the way the market works? Not exactly. It's more along the lines of this can explain some things to us, it can't explain other things to us, all right? So it's a useful tool in a given context. Now, in our context right now, going to be extremely useful. Let me get this back up on here again. Quantity, price. So what is inflation? Inflation is when you move upward on that vertical axis, all right? That's what inflation is. It's a rate of increase of prices. It's not just prices being higher. That's not inflation. Inflation causes that. But inflation per se is a rate of increase of prices. Now, what can cause prices to go up? Well, let's put that supply and demand diagram back on there. Demand, supply. Now, first thing you see is there's two basic ways for, let's say we start right here. P sub 0. There's two basic ways prices can go up. One is we can have the demand curve shift to the right. Let's see here. I think this red pen would be nice for that. For whatever reason, demand goes up. Look at that. What you have initially, oh, by the way, I like to do this in class when I teach this. It's kind of hard to unsee the blue demand curve. Because remember, it's not there anymore, all right? The whole thing moved. So what I like to do is I like to make it into a ghost curve. That's where it used to be. But it ain't there no more, all right? So we're on this blue supply curve and this red demand curve, and what we've got now at the existing price, when there hadn't been time to adjust yet, there's your quantity demanded. Does the camera go down that low? Yeah, it does. And there's your quantity supplied. There's an excess demand for whatever good or service this is. And so what's going to happen is, like I explained a minute ago, what's going to happen is the price is going to get bid up, all right? And we're going to move up this curve here and move up this curve here and end up at P sub 1. And P sub 1 is not inflation. P sub 1 is a price level. Inflation is the increase. It's the rate of increase, right? But obviously the two are related. A rate of increase then causes a higher price level. But I'm just kind of pointing out some of the terminology here. Now, so there's one way to cause inflation, all right? You can shift the demand curve to the right. Now let's stop and think, we're the Federal Reserve. How do we fix this? Oh my gosh, we're in charge of this. We've been told we have to do this. The economy is panicking because there's inflation. There's two things we can do. And let's tidy up the graph real quick. Let's get rid of some of this. How shall I do that? No, let's just leave it where it is right now. Right. There's two things we can do. We can, hey, I wonder if Big Orange is going to work here. Oh yeah, that's a good one. All right. You can either try to move the supply curve to the right. If you move the supply curve to the right, that's going to lower those prices, all right? So that's going to address the inflation. In fact, we're going to end up with deflation to bring the prices back down, all right? But we could shift that out to the right, which could mitigate the inflation or perhaps even reverse it. Or we could move the demand curve back to where it was, all right? Now let's think about those two choices. One of the problems is that in mainstream economics, they have the idea that the economy automatically works its way to full employment. That, in other words, we're already at maximum supply. We can't supply any more than we are right now. We can't shift the curve. Let me repeat that. There's a common idea in neoclassical or mainstream economics that supply takes care of itself, and that the economy automatically moves to maximum supply or full employment supply. It can grow over time as technology goes up and so forth, but in the short run, it's pretty much stuck where it is. We might have some temporary fluctuations in the supply curve, but for the most part, we can't really affect supply. That's the bottom line. we can't really affect supply, which is most certainly true in terms of the tools of analysis that the Federal Reserve has. I mean, you would need to do things like maybe subsidize construction in the industry. Remember when we had that whole COVID thing and the government did all it could to try to get a new a vaccine created? They did all kind of tax breaks and subsidies and so forth. Well, that's fiscal policy. That's not monetary policy. That's not something the Federal Reserve is in charge of. They are not in charge of the things that would most likely affect the supply curve, not to mention the fact that in terms of their theory, the supply curve is not really the issue. The supply curve is taking care of itself, all right? So that leaves us with this, that the Federal Reserve then must lean towards this idea, we need to lower demand. We need to put the demand back to where it was. Economy done heated up too much and we need to cool it back down. You may well have heard that very kind of language being used by our officials in the Federal Reserve. Now, how do they do this? How do they make the demand curve go back and bring the prices back down? Well, what they do is they raise interest rates. They raise interest rates so much that they hope it causes an economic contraction that is big enough to move the demand curve back. Economy weak? Lower the interest rate. Economy strong? Raise the interest rate. It's as simple as that. That gives you enough information to pretty much follow Federal Reserve policy for at least the last 40, 45, 50 years, right? And back before that. Here's the problem. It's a really bad idea based on a couple of misconceptions. Let's tidy this up. And look at that again. Vertical, horizontal, quantity, price, supply, demand. Here was our original price. Then there was some inflation caused by an increase in demand. Eventually led us to piece of one, all right? And then, let me add this. And then their idea is, this is a problem right here. This is a problem, right? We need to put that back. This is based on a couple of misconceptions. The first is what actually causes inflation. The problem is that rarely in the real world is inflation initiated by a rightward shift in demand. What is far more common in the real world is something we haven't discussed yet, and that is a leftward shift in supply. That is a far more common source of inflation. So this rarely happens anyway. All right, this rarely happens anyway. Now, can we point to periods in U.S. economic history where there was inflation caused by a rightward shift in the demand curve? Well, I believe so. This was a major problem in the U.S. during World War II. When we ended up, in order to address this rightward shift in demand that happened when we had unemployment less than 2%, we weren't even making that many consumer products anymore because we were using the steel to make Jeeps and tanks and so forth, right? So we have all this inflation, and so they tried to drain the money out of the system by they raised taxes, they encouraged people to buy war bonds, and they rationed, and they had price controls, all right? So this is what they did. And that was a logical response to the problem at the time, right? But every serious bout of inflation since then has been caused by the supply side. Take, for example, the most serious post-war episode of inflation, the 1970s, early 1980s. Hey, let's look at that. Oh, I hit my hat with my hand. Well, it's an occupational hazard. Let's see, quantity, price, supply, and I'm going to put supply 1972. Quantity. We'll put price sub 1972 and quantity sub 1972. All right. Now, what happened in this period? The inflation was a direct result of the OPEC oil embargo that followed the Arab-Israeli War of 1973. They shifted their supply of oil to the left by creating quotas for each of the countries that exported oil. And this was a punishment for the United States and for the West in general, I suppose, helping Israel like they did. They almost got beat in the 73 war, and then they didn't. Supply, 1974. Well, October of 73 is when the war was. That's why they called it the October War. And then afterward, they got together and they lowered the supply. Prices tripled in oil. And given the prime importance of energy to almost every other sector, other prices soon followed. All right. So this is what happened. And we ended up with price of 1974. Okay. Now here's the question. Uh-oh, say the folks at the Federal Reserve, we need to raise interest rates. And that's exactly what they did. They raised interest rates to lower the demand. Oh, look what I did. I got carried away there and put a Q on the demand curve. D. What they actually did to try to solve the problem that was caused by this leftward shift in the supply curve was shift the demand curve to the left. The interest rates were so high that at one point, the prime interest rate, the rate that banks' best customers get, went above 20%. Can you even begin to imagine? We had the worst recession since the Great Depression because of this. Now, looking at our graph, does that help inflation? Or if I got a decent black pen here, let's see. Yeah, that's okay. I guess we'll go with orange. All right, so can we stop the inflation by shifting the demand curve back to the left? Well, kind of. We'll call that piece of 1980. If you can read that properly or not, that's not great, but I think you can see the idea. What we can do here is we can absolutely treat the symptom. We can absolutely treat the symptom. We can get the prices back to where they were. If we shift the demand curve far enough to the left, then we can get rid of the inflation, but Lord have mercy. This is a little bit like, oh, I have a hangnail and it really hurts. Oh, well, let me cut your arm off. And you're right, the hangnail doesn't hurt anymore. Well, that's what we did to people. Look what we did to people. The quantity of oil being consumed in 1972, which is the actual benefit of all this, global climate change ignored for the moment. In the middle of the crisis, we've got quantities of 1974, or actually early on in the crisis. And then we shift the demand curve to the left to solve, quote unquote, the inflation. That says Q 1980. I don't know how well that comes up. I can kind of see it. But the bottom line is that the actual shortage caused that. And then the Fed lowering demand caused it to get even worse. Caused it to be even worse than it was in the first place. Yes, prices come down, but the way we accomplish it is by making everybody so poor they can no longer afford the good or services in short supply. We end up back at the old price, well, at least closer to it, but at an even lower quantity than we had at the new higher price. All right? In real terms, we are worse off than when we started. Thank you, Federal Reserve. Meanwhile, back at the Fed, they're having a big party. They're straining their shoulder muscles, trying to pat themselves on the back. We did it. We solved it. We solved it. This is exactly what they were saying to themselves in the early 80s. Well, okay, inflation did come way down. And sometimes prices even fell. There was deflation, all right? So if it wasn't them, if they didn't solve it by pushing this demand curve back to the left, which clearly cannot possibly solve the problem. A shortage cannot be solved by lowering demand. It simply cannot. The prices can come back down. All right, we can end up with the symptoms being addressed. But the underlying problem, still there, still got to be fixed. Like you bring your fever down, you got some sort of terrible viral infection. Okay, we got the fever down, which is kind of good, except you still got the infection. We need to really address the infection. So what really happened in the 80s that brought those prices back down? 3 things. First, those OPEC agreements among those various countries to limit their supply, that collapsed. Iran and Iraq were at war with each other. And they were cheating like crazy on their production quotas because they needed money to finance their militaries. Everybody else figuring, well, crap, why should I be holding back on my supply just to drive the price up for Iran and Iraq. I'm going to sell as much as I can too. And the oil prices started to fall. All right, the supply curve went back to the right. Second thing that happened, firms found ways to substitute away from oil and consumers learned to economize. There were even tax breaks at one point to help firms retool their equipment so they wouldn't be as dependent on oil. Now remember, that's fiscal policy, that's not the Fed. That allowed the demand curve to shift to the left as well, not because people were poorer, but because they simply found a way to do without as much oil. And the third thing that happened, so we've got supply curve going back to the right, demand curve going back a little bit to the left, but not because people were poor. As the price of oil rose here, that made it profitable to search for more oil, or same impact, or to go ahead and pump oil out of the ground that we already knew about, but was too expensive to mine at the time. So that shifted the supply curve to the right. All right, so we've got two things shifting the supply curve back to the right, and one thing shifting the demand curve back to the left. None of those things, not a single one of them, was helped by raising interest rates. Hell, think about it. If you're one of those firms that's needing to retool and you've got to pay more to borrow money to do this, that's not helping. And don't forget who is always hurt first by an economic downturn: those who can least afford to be hurt. Now we can tell similar stories to this right here about COVID inflation, about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and about the U.S. war on Iran and the impact on the Gulf of Hormuz. All the same thing. Every single one of those is represented by a leftward shift in the supply curve, all right? And long story short, so the bottom line is this: can the Fed, their policy of raising interest rates, can it solve, that's air quotes, solve inflation? Yeah, but this is like cupping and bleeding the patient. It treats a symptom while leaving the underlying disease even worse. It accomplishes nothing useful. There is no kind of inflation. By the way, I deal with this in my recently published book. What's it called again? U.S. Business Cycles 1954 to 2020. Symptoms, solutions, and something else. I can't remember what I called it. It's 3 S's. I had a real nice alliteration that makes people want to buy it. Anyway, it goes over all these different kinds of inflation. And in each and every single one of them cases, it says raising the interest rate is not helpful. Now, what about those times when, okay, so let's go back to my earlier situation. I said that most inflation is caused by a leftward shift in the supply curve. Man, you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and read up on their explanation of inflation, at least up until recently. And it always breaks it down. Oh, there was an early freeze in Florida, caused the orange juices to go, up or whatever. Almost always, it's a supply side issue, right? But I admitted that it can be a demand side issue, like I did with the World War II. What do we do in those cases? Is raising an interest rate still a good idea when it is inflation caused by the demand curve moving to the right? Well, first of all, let's stop and think about that. Wow, the economy is growing so fast that we can't keep up with it. The supply can't keep up with it. So demand shifts out to the right and prices and quantities increase. P sub 0, Q sub 0, Q sub 1, P sub 1. All right? Where's the problem? Where's the problem here? We're enjoying higher quantities. That's the actual standard of living down there. We're enjoying higher quantities. And because the rising demand raised the prices which created the profits, that also induced firms to expand output. All right? When demand goes up, this causes a signal to go to entrepreneurs. This is one of the times when the market system actually works really well, and yet the Fed tries to stop it. The demand goes up, prices go up, profits go up, and producers make more. What did the consumers want? They wanted more. What did the signal created by the rising profits and prices, what did it cause the producers to do? To produce more. It's exactly what they wanted. So, even if the Fed were right about a particular bout of inflation being driven by increased demand, this in no way suggests that we should try to lower the demand. Let the market do what it does well. All right? Let those prices rise so entrepreneurs will produce more. Now, you might worry about them folks that is on fixed or meager incomes, and rightly you should. But there's other ways to deal with that. You think that causing a recession is going to help them? They'll be the first ones that are hurt. Raise the minimum wage. Raise Social Security. How about a job program? Each of those directly helps those who need it and does not create a reduction in the level of economic activity that would almost certainly hit them the worst. The only thing recession really accomplishes in these contexts is to make sure that labor gets screwed. Intentional or not, and many of my colleagues believe it is intentional, this causing a recession is a way of making the workers compliant. All right? Oh no, prices are rising because demand is so high. Let's lower demand and beat the crap out of those working men and women who might have otherwise found their wages bid up. Notice we don't try to lower demand when stock prices are high? Well, that's perfectly fine. Long story short, Federal Reserve's anti-inflation policy is impotent at best, but usually rubs salt in our wounds. I hope you learned something from this and that you now find yourself disgusted by the Fed's standard operating procedure. There's a job they should be doing, by the way, and that's closely monitoring the financial system. But they don't apparently get too excited about that. They figure the market monitors itself just fine. So here we are, with the Fed not showing up when they need to and sticking their noses in where they ain't welcome. Why, it's just like my next door neighbor, Bob. Actually, my next door neighbors are really nice. And that's it for today. Now that I got it all set up, I hope to make several more here before the end of the summer. Maybe I'll stagger them out and be like, I could have like midnight releases like they do for the Harry Potter books. May the Force be with you.